Good afternoon and welcome. Today's video lecture topic is meiosis. So we've been talking about mitosis and the cell cycle, and now we are going to learn about meiosis, which is a special type of cell division that is necessary for sexual reproduction. So, chromosomes and chromosomes numbers. Human body cells or somatic cells, that's another word for body cells, they have 46 chromosomes. Each parent contributes 23 chromosomes to that 46. So you have 23 that comes from the mom and the egg, and then you have 23 that comes from the dad, from the sperm. And homologous chromosomes are chromosomes that are paired. They're paired chromosomes with the same genes, one from each parent. So you have the same genes on each of the chromosomes, but you'll have different versions of the gene. So one chromosome may have the version for the dominant, and one chromosome may have a recessive version. And we are going to talk more about what dominant and recessive means. You may remember it from middle school, but we'll talk more about that when we get further into on genetics. And so right here is a karyotype of all 23 chromosomes that you would have in your cells, and you see one, like they're paired, and so one pair comes from the mom and one set comes from the mom and one set comes from the dad. All right, so we have different types of cells. You have haploid and diploid cells, and so gametes are sex cells, and so they can be egg or sperm, and gametes contain 23 chromosomes. So two important vocabulary words are diploid and haploid. And so a diploid cell is a cell that contains two or two sets of chromosomes. And so those our somatic or body cells are diploid. And then haploid are cells with N or one set of chromosomes. And our gametes are the only type of cells in our body that are haploid. And so you see here's a diagram, and this is a haploid chromosome. So it's just one set or one. And then you see the diploid chromosome have the two sets or two sister chromatids. All right, so why do sex cells need to have half the number of chromosomes? And the reason why they need to have half the number of chromosomes is to maintain the same number of chromosomes from generation to generation. So when you have a sperm cell and it fertilizes the egg cell, if they both have 23 chromosomes, then you have that right amount of chromosomes being maintained in that new cell. And so, like I've already said, each of our body cells contain 46 chromosomes. So that's why it's important for our sex cells to have half that amount, so that when they come together, they will have that proper amount of 46. All right, so the sexual life cycle requires meiosis, and meiosis produces gametes, which are sex cells. And so when gametes combine in fertilization, the number of chromosomes is restored. So where are we? Okay, so I just answered question 8A on your notes organizer. And so that number is restored during fertilization. And so if you look at this diagram, you have a female. She has diploid cells or two N cells. And then the male has also diploid 2N cells in his body. And so the male sperm cell is haploid and the female sex cell is haploid. And so when they join together during fertilization, that cell that is created, it is a diploid cell, and that cell eventually will grow into an adult male or adult female. All right, so meiosis reduces the chromosome number by half through the separation of homologous chromosomes. So a diploid cell is changed into haploid cells. and it involves two consecutive cell divisions called meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. All right, so the big picture. The big picture is that DNA is duplicated only once prior to meiosis. So it's important that you guys remember, in order to produce the haploid gametes, the DNA must be duplicated once, but the cell divides twice. So the DNA is replicated or duplicated once, but you have two cell divisions, and it produces 4 genetically different daughter cells. So it is key to remember that during meiosis, the cells that are produced are all different from each other. They are not identical, but they are all genetically different. All right, so meiosis starts off, interphase occurs before meiosis actually happens. And so during interphase, just like in mitosis, or like in the cell cycle, the cell is growing, it's carrying out its normal function, and the DNA is replicating or being copied. So make sure you guys write down what is happening during interphase of meiosis. So just like what happens during interphase of mitosis, same thing happens in interphase of meiosis. Okay, so this is a visual of meiosis 1. You can pause this and you can draw these diagrams, but we are about to talk about each one in more detail. So you can draw as we talk about each one. It's your choice. All right, so prophase 1. Prophase 1 is when the chromosomes are being formed. So the DNA condenses into chromosomes, and you can actually see the chromosomes. But homologous chromosomes pair up. So during mitosis, you don't have any homologous chromosomes pair up. But in meiosis, you do have the homologous chromosomes pairing up, and they form a tetrad, and you see they hold hands, and crossing over takes place during prophase 1. So underline, highlight, remember, you have to remember that what's very important about prophase 1 of meiosis is that crossing over takes place. And also the spindle forms from the centrioles, and the nuclear membrane breaks down. All right, so we're going to just talk more about prophase 1 and crossing over, because it's very, very important that you guys remember that crossing over occurs during this stage of prophase 1. And so crossing over is just when the chromosomal segments are exchanged between a pair of homologous chromosomes. And so think about, like, if I had a cap on and you had a cap on, and we exchanged caps. And so I place my cap on your head, you place your cap on my head. So we exchanged caps or hats. And so the same thing happens during crossing over. The sister chromatids, they hold hands and they exchange material. And so you see how, like, okay, say for example, like down here, the blue is representing the male chromosome, and the pink is representing the female chromosome. And so then they just hold hands, exchange materials, and so you see you have a little piece of pink on this blue chromosome, and now you have a little piece of blue on this pink chromosome. And so now these chromosomes are not the same anymore, and they have exchanged genetic info. And let me go back, because crossing over is very important because it leads to genetic diversity or genetic variation. So all of the cells that are produced during meiosis are all different because of crossing over. And that is, crossing over is one of the reasons why you, like, say you have a sibling, a brother or a sister, you don't look exactly like your brother or your sister, even though y'all may have the same biological parents, because of crossing over. All right, so during metaphase 1, you have the homologous chromosomes, and they pair up along the middle. So remember, meta is middle, and so the chromosomes pair up along the middle of the cell. And so this is different from mitosis, because in mitosis you have a single line of chromosomes, but in meiosis 1 you have pairs or homologous chromosomes pairing up at the middle. And so then the chromosomes also attach, the centromeres attached to the spindle fibers, and this right here, that little ball in the middle, that is a centromere. And so those centromeres become attached to the spindle fiber, and then the spindle fiber it separates them, but that's not until the next stage. Okay, so during anaphase 1, the homologous chromosomes separate and move to the opposite poles of the cell. So make sure that you are drawing the picture, and you're also given a description of what is occurring during each stage. That is very important. Okay, so telophase 1 is when the chromosomes begin to uncoil. You have two nuclei that's reforming, and the cell begins to divide and the spindle fibers break down. So the cell doesn't divide completely, but it begins to start to divide. All right, so following meiosis 1, we are left with 2 haploid daughter cells. So right here, this is a visual of meiosis 1 in males. And so you see at the end of meiosis 1, you have 2 cells that are produced, and they are haploid daughter cells. All right, so now we're going to talk about meiosis 2, and meiosis 2 begins with prophase, but it's prophase 2, so the chromosome condenses, the nucleus breaks down, the spindle fibers form, but you have 2 cells. So it's the same thing that occurs in prophase 1, but instead of having 1 cell, you have 2 cells down. Okay, metaphase 2, you have a haploid number of chromosomes, so they're lining up at the equator, but they're lining up single file. So that is a key difference between metaphase 1 and metaphase 2. Metaphase 2, the chromosomes are lining up single file. That is very important to remember. Underline it, highlight it, do what you have to do to remember that they line up single file. Okay, anaphase 2, the sister chromatids are pulled apart at the centromere by the spindle fibers, and then they're moved toward the opposite poles of the cell. So anaphase 1, you have the chromosomes being pulled apart, but now you have the sister chromatids being pulled apart. Okay, telophase 2, the chromosomes reach the poles, the nuclear membrane and the nuclei reform. And you see you have 4 cells. And then cytokinesis after telophase 2 results in 4 haploid cells. Each cell has n number of chromosomes, or 1 set of chromosomes. All right, so you guys see meiosis 2 in males and meiosis 2 in females. And so like at the end of meiosis 2 in males, you have 4 sperm cells that are created. And then at the end of meiosis 2, you have 1 mature egg cell that's created, and then the other cells are polar bodies. So only 1 cell matures into a egg cell. So that's a difference between meiosis 2 in males and meiosis 2 in females. Males create 4 sperm cells, but females only create 1 egg cell, and the other cells are polar bodies, and eventually they disintegrate. Okay, so the importance of meiosis. The importance of meiosis is the fact that it produces 4 haploid daughter cells that are not identical. And so this results in genetic variation. It produces gametes or sex cells. So you guys need to remember that the cells that are produced during meiosis are haploid. They are all different, and meiosis produces gametes. So highlight that, underline it, do what you got to do to remember the fact that meiosis produces gametes, and gametes are what? Sex cells. Okay, so meiosis provides variation because depending on how the chromosomes line up at the equator, four gametes with four different combinations of chromosomes can result. So like remember we talked about